Sky-high inflation, AI's big boom, and Taylor Swift's economy all made headlines in 2023. As we get ready to close the year, Yahoo Finance brought in experts to take a look back at the moments that defined it. Here's our countdown for the year's top 10 stories.
We are counting down to the top 10 stories of 2023 here at Yahoo Finance, and coming in at number 10, X becomes X. Twitter isn't worth what it used to be. After paying $44 billion for the social media company in October, Elon Musk now values his company at just $20 billion. In a tweet, Musk announcing that he's found a new CEO.
Well, the Securities and Exchange Commission is suing Elon Musk to force him to testify about his purchase of Twitter, now known as X.
Overall, 2023 has been a real turnaround year for X.
It has been indeed quite an eventful year for the social network formerly known as Twitter. X got a new name and CEO, but the platform is also contending with several hurdles due to owner Elon Musk's controversial posts. Here with a snapshot of the year in review for X, Yahoo Finance's Dan Hellie is here with us on set. So let's run through the year that was for X, shall we?
Yeah, it's been a lot for the company. Here's just a few of the biggest things that happened in the year that X became X. Let's kick things off in March when news came out that, as you had said in the past, Twitter's valuation dropped from $44 billion that Musk paid for the company to just $20 billion. Then that same month, Musk named Linda Yaccarino the new CEO of Twitter, and then he took over the role of CTO. Although from what we've been seeing, I don't even know what that means at this point. Smelling some blood in the water, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta in July launched their Twitter competitor Threads in a bid to grab users and, more importantly, advertisers who disapproved of Musk's decision to reinstate previously banned accounts and his own controversial comments. And then also in July, Musk did the famous rebrand. He ended Twitter, killed the bird, and turned it into X. He said the company hit a new all-time high of 531 million monthly users. Then in September, Musk said advertising revenue for X was down 60%. And then he blamed the Anti-Defamation League, saying the group, which fights anti-Semitism, was the biggest generator of anti-Semitism content on X. He then met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss AI as well as anti-Semitism. Then he claimed that X had 550 million monthly active users. In October, we're not even done with the year yet somehow, the SEC sued Musk to force him to testify about a probe into Twitter's share purchases around the time Musk was buying the company. In November, this is going to be the big month, it was miserable for X. First, Musk expressed support for an anti-Semitic post, drawing condemnation from the ADL, White House, and advertisers. Then, after left-leaning Media Matters for America issued a report saying that ads on X for companies including Apple, IBM, and others appeared next to Nazi content, advertisers began pulling out of the company. After that, Musk went on a rant about advertisers during an interview at the New York Times DealBook Summit, cursing out companies that pulled their ads and specifically calling out Disney CEO Bob Iger. More recently, just this week, Musk reactivated conspiracy theorist Alex Jones's account, and then he also made Grok, the ChatGPT rival for X.AI, available for X Premium Plus subscribers. So, whoa, interesting. How is this not number one? I don't understand, but whatever. I'll give it for number 10. Just a mind-blowing year for this company. Probably not Linda Yaccarino's favorite time to be part of a company.
No. It's interesting. That's a lot of drama. That's a lot. Yeah. That's a lot of headlines. What do you think is ahead for 2024? Or let me ask you this: when you think about its business, just the economics of X, do you think it's advertising, given all the challenges there? Is it subscriptions? Is it AI? Is it some combination of those three?
It's the super app.
Yeah, is that it?
Look, advertising, and we've seen advertisers pull out of X before. They've also pulled out of Facebook, by the way, and then everybody jumped back on because they're like, well, we need to show our stuff to people. So we'll see how long this all lasts, right? But advertising is still its key revenue driver, but they are continuing to push the subscription service. They have the X Premium Plus, and the Premium Plus is so you don't have ads. Premium is you see fewer ads, but you're still paying. So why do you see ads to begin with? I don't really get that. So it's going to be the subscription model and then adding more features to X Premium and Premium Plus. So that's where the Grok comes in with Premium Plus. They're kind of trying to make it more of an app where everything happens. You can also upload much longer video content with the more premium subscription service. So that's really where the revenue goes. But I mean, there's been predictions from some companies where they say, look, this is where X ends. I don't really think so. Everybody says the demise of these social networks is coming, and then it never happens. And for X, obviously it's not a publicly traded company at the moment. They seemingly want to do that in the future. We'll see. But they said the same thing about Meta, and then its share prices shot up. So I don't know if necessarily this is going to be the end. People still want to advertise.
Bob Iger's return to Disney.
Disney had some drama this week. The company opposed activist investor Nelson Peltz's attempt to join its board.
And basically the very first day that Iger stepped back into that CEO position, he undid it all.
The company is cutting a total of 7,000 workers as it looks to slash $5.5 billion in costs.
ESPN used to be the cash cow for Disney. We're talking billions of dollars a year in profit.
I don't think shareholders in general, while maybe some of the shine has come off of Bob Iger in his second stint, I don't think shareholders really want to see him go, and I don't think in general they think that Peltz has anything to add to the conversation.
It's been quite an eventful year for Disney and its CEO. After about 11 months away from the company, Iger returned in November 2022 following the ousting of Bob Chapek. Iger initially planned to stay just 2 years while seeking out a successor, but now he's set to stay on until 2026. Here with a snapshot of the year in review for Bob Iger and Disney. We have Yahoo Finance's Alexandra Canal.
Hi, Brad. That's right. It was a wild 2023 for Disney CEO Bob Iger following his surprise return to the company just a little over a year ago. And since that time, he's had his hands full. The stock is teetering on multi-year record lows. And there are certainly plenty of questions heading into next year. But despite it all, Iger has addressed several key issues that were big question marks at the end of 2022. So let's break them down, shall we? Number one, who will buy Hulu? That would be Disney. Now, this is an outcome that Wall Street largely expected, but it wasn't a guarantee after Iger insinuated earlier this year that general entertainment was not part of the company's strategy. He eventually reversed course, confirming that Disney will buy the remaining 33% Hulu stake from Comcast for at least $8.61 billion. The two companies are currently in negotiations to determine its full value. So safe to say the future of Hulu is set, which brings me to question number two. What is the future of ESPN? Now, this was a biggie for analysts last year, with some suggesting Disney should consider spinning off the sports network. Clearly, that's not happening as Bob Iger doubles down on the importance of sports. In fact, he plans to take ESPN fully over the top as a direct-to-consumer streaming service sometime over the next few years. So ESPN not going anywhere just yet. But speaking of streaming, what is Disney's streaming strategy? In the Bob Chapek era, there was a lot of confusion when it comes to what Disney should be in the streaming world. And because of that, there was an overproduction of content, especially for Marvel and Star Wars. Bob Iger, though, he wants to change that. He said the company will be focused on quality over quantity. He suggested that certain franchises might not need multiple sequels and that animation needs to get back to its creative roots. So just one example of this Chapek era reversal. Another one, though, is theme parks. And Bob Iger did reintroduce certain elements of the parks business that Bob Chapek had previously undone, like bringing back more incentives for premium park members, as well as introducing new offerings and complimentary services. But he's also raised prices on certain tickets and annual passes as the company commits plans to spend $60 billion on parks over the next 10 years. But while we're talking theme parks, have to talk Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, because it seems like Disney essentially won that battle. Bob Iger not mincing words when asked about the political firestorm several times over this past year. He's called DeSantis anti-Florida, anti-business, and then earlier this summer, the governor urged Disney to, quote, drop the lawsuit, which Disney has not done at this point. So although the fight is still ongoing, it seems as though DeSantis has backed down, at least for now. So all in all, quite the productive year for Iger. Despite all of these obstacles for Disney, still much more the CEO will have to address in 2024. Brad, Shauna.
at number 8, the one and only Taylor Swift and the tailor-made economy.
Taylor Swift making music history today, announcing she's going back on tour after a 5-year break.
Pre-sales for her upcoming tour kicked off yesterday, but a surge in demand caused Ticketmaster's website to freeze or even crash altogether.
There's so much fanfare around the summer that has been Taylor Swift.
Jersey sales for Travis Kelce up 400%. His podcast hitting #1 on the Apple charts, all because of Taylor.
Taylor Swift.
For Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift.
For Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift is breaking the internet again.
Obviously a huge year for Taylor Swift and her fans. So joining us with a snapshot of the year in review for Taylor, our very own on the Taylor Swift beat here for us, Yahoo Finance's Josh Schaefer. Josh?
Hey, Maddie. Yeah, so as we know, it was a big year for Taylor Swift and that tailor-made economy, but finance news really also got in their Taylor Swift era this year as well. And that's what we have next to me here. So as Taylor Swift was making billions estimated by a couple outlets on this tour, she was getting a lot of mentions for what she was doing in the economy and boosting consumer spending. So we got a little timeline for you here. The first real mention, one of the bigger mentions, came in July 12th. It was a Fed Beige Book release, and the Philadelphia Fed actually highlighted that Taylor Swift, when she had a tour there, boosted hotel sales and boosted the overall economy. Moody's highlighted something similar 2 months later, pointing out all the local economies that Taylor Swift was in were actually growing more than some of the other economies, seeing a boost specifically on that week that the Eras Tour came to town. Now, this all culminated a little bit in July, big month for Taylor, when she was mentioned in a question about consumer spending. Taylor Swift and Barbie both got a mention in that question, sort of laying out the resilient consumer narrative that Fed Chair Powell ended up answering toward. Should note, he didn't actually give Taylor a shout out himself, unfortunately. But the timeline goes on because it was a big year for Taylor Swift. Morgan Stanley came out in August actually highlighting they thought consumer spending was going to fall during the fall because of the end of the Eras Tour. They noted that Taylor Swift and Beyonce's concerts combined over the summer had added several billions of dollars to consumer spending, and they were actually a little bit concerned about the fallback from that. And then moving into the latter part of the fall, we're still seeing Taylor Swift mentions in Wall Street strategy notes, which is relatively rare, not a normal thing to see a pop star come up from a Wall Street strategist that's talking about the S&P 500, but that's exactly what David Kostin's team at Goldman Sachs did. They named their outlook, all you had to do was stay. That's a Taylor Swift song, and they're telling investors to stay in the market. And then just last week, she was named Time Person of the Year, culminating the big year that was for Taylor Swift. And I have also with us, I didn't even mention the movie. The movie wasn't in the timeline because it wasn't finance news, but $123 million for the Taylor Swift Eras Tour when that concert film premiered in theaters, sort of changing the game when it comes to bringing a live concert to theaters. And a final graph here, because this is sort of what the Taylor Swift story meant to me this year, thinking about what it meant for the economy. It was really a story of the resilient consumer, a way for us to understand that these GDP numbers, a lot of people thought they were going to go negative in 2023, and instead they stayed positive. Taylor Swift, Barbie, that entire summer of spending was one way that we sort of understood what this graph was really telling us, because we all get T Swift, and we couldn't get enough of her this year, and we probably won't get enough of her next year either. I don't think the Taylor Swift economy is really going to be going anywhere, Jared.
You know, really interesting. I think with all the demand pulled forward in 2023, we might be looking at increased delinquency rates as a theme in 2024. And I think the tailor-made economy would take a little bit of a different twist, though, but not casting aspersions on Taylor Swift. Thank you for that report, Josh Schaefer.
Coming in at number 7, Sam Bankman Fried goes on trial.
Sam Bankman Fried pleaded not guilty to federal fraud charges.
It's going to be an uphill battle for Bankman Fried and his defense team.
Sam Bankman Fried's bail has been revoked and was immediately handcuffed and placed in custody.
Sam Bankman Fried found guilty of all 7 charges.
The jury clearly was receptive to the government's case, was not persuaded by Bankman Fried's testimony, and we saw that with their swift verdict.
2023 brought the anticipated criminal fraud trial of FTX founder Sam Bankman Fried after the collapse of his crypto exchange in 2022. The time came for Bankman Fried to make his case in court. Here with how the case unfolded is Yahoo Finance's Alexis Keenan. Alexis.
Yeah, guys, so it's been exactly 1
year since Bankman Fried was arrested in the Bahamas, and he was charged, as we now know, with these 7 counts of criminal fraud and money laundering. And they were federal charges alleging that the reason that FTX imploded was because Bankman Fried and his top executives were taking money from the exchange that was put there by customers, by lenders, by investors, and used it to push over to his sister crypto hedge fund, Alameda Research, which then in turn spent the money on lavish real estate, multi-million-dollar real estate, multi-million-dollar political donations, as well as risky crypto investments. Now, it was this year, though, that this New York City criminal trial unfolded in October over a 4-week period. And the justice here for Bankman Fried was really swift. He pleaded guilty in January, and it was the beginning of November by the time the jury agreed with the Justice Department here, saying that he was guilty of these fraud charges. The charges carry 110 years in federal prison. And you had Sam Bankman-Fried's top executives turning against him, taking plea deals with the government, and saying that they participated in this scheme that brought this $34 billion exchange down to a $9 billion deficit, to the point where the exchange could not return customer funds.
I mean, was just a stunning story. I mean, when we count down the top stories of the year, this one is a no-brainer to be on the list because it kind of had everything from a story perspective, although unfortunately for the people involved, had a lot to affect. I mean, you know, the fact that SBF was romantically involved with one of the people who testified against him, who was running the hedge fund.
Caroline Ellison, yes.
Caroline Ellison, the fact that a bunch of them were living together in the Bahamas.
He was hanging out with celebrities like Tom Brady. He became part of our pop culture. And look, this was one of the largest financial frauds in U.S. history, so certainly significant. And also, you know, this really became, Bankman Fried became the face of what is a much bigger, a much wider government prosecution and crackdown on the crypto industry. You saw the CEO of Binance make a guilty plea to DOJ charges that are money laundering related, paying a huge fine there, $4+ billion. You also had the SEC going after Grayscale, Coinbase, and Ripple, not always succeeding, but definitely trying here. And Bankman Fried, though, absolutely the primary target in this enterprise.
And Alexis, the bankruptcy hearing tomorrow is just spinning ahead. What do you expect there? And the bottom line question of whether these customers are going to get their money back.
Yeah, so tomorrow is another day in court. It's a typical day in court. It's an omnibus hearing, but we should get some updates about how much money the exchange has recovered. So far, it's the last we heard was about $7 billion+. So customers hoping to get some money back there. But look, the exchange has to pay back its lenders as well. There's a lot of people standing in line, customers not certainly at the front of that line, but it's a general hearing. We should learn a little bit more about the fate of this company as it works its way through the bankruptcy process.
All right. The headline of the day from Bloomberg, by the way, Sam Bankman-Fried's lawyer says client was the worst witness he has ever seen. So
I mean, it's not exactly a surprising headline, but it is and it isn't.
He was not a star witness.
No,
but
you were
maybe
there,
he
Alexis.
didn't have a choice either.
Yeah, Alexis, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And coming in at number 6 is retail theft. Target, Walmart, Walgreens, Home Depot, all calling out theft as a real threat to their business.
It's a $100 billion problem for our industry as a whole. So it's a big problem.
Shrink, though, has been one of the common lines and threads that we've been able to draw, unfortunately, through many of these retail earnings this season.
They're in a position now where these type of flash robberies, these smash and grabs, or they've been called mobberies, are very lucrative and very successful for them.
Well, retailers sounded the alarm in 2023 as retail theft climbed in the headlines with giants like Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Nordstrom, and others all mentioning it as an issue. But how much of it is actual theft? Brooke DePalma joins us now with more on that. Hey, Brooke.
Good morning, Shauna. Well, inventory shrinkage is really that overarching term that includes the loss of items to retail theft, organized crime, internal theft like employees stealing, errors, among other factors. And while retail theft certainly garnered attention across Main Street and Wall Street in 2023, we actually won't know the true financial impact until next year, once all retailers' fiscal years have ended. But what we do know now is that in fiscal year 2022, there already was a 1.6% increase, accounting for $112.1 billion in losses. Now, previously, it was believed that the majority of that theft was from organized retail groups. What we now know is that the majority of shrink is from both organized retail crime and employee theft. That's followed by errors that make up about 27% of total shrink and unknown or other reasons after that. But retailers have gotten so many questions about what exactly this means for the company's bottom line. Target CEO said earlier this year there was a 120% increase in the first 5 months of 2023 involving violence and threats. And that ultimately led to the retail giant closing 9 stores in October, blaming theft and organized retail crime for contributing to an unsustainable business performance at those stores. Now, Target expects inventory shrinkage, but mostly theft, to cut profits by $500 million in total this year. Meanwhile, at stores that remain open, that tend to be hit by theft, Target installed things like locked cases, additional security, and is even training store leaders and employees to combat this. Now, when I went to Walmart's annual meeting back in May, CEO Doug McMillon said that at the time, the company really does prefer to never lock anything up since it really does interfere with customers' experience. But U.S. CEO John Furner said in a call that shrink has increased a bit both this year and last year, but it remains uneven across the U.S. Now, Nordstrom's CEO said on an earnings call that loss to theft is still at a historical high, calling it unacceptable. And at the end of the day, many experts believe that the only way to really solve this issue is for retailers, third-party sellers, those who may have stolen goods, then putting them on their platforms. In addition to law enforcement, legislators, well, many believe that they all need to work together. And that'll be something that we'll certainly be looking out for in 2024. Many hoping it happens, but really unclear if it will.
Coming in at number 5, the weight loss drug craze.
Pfizer is entering the weight loss drug space for the first time.
Pharma companies Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly, and Pfizer are all competing to seek FDA approval of a first-in-class oral weight loss and diabetes drug.
The skyrocketing success of weight loss drugs like Ozempic has completely upended the $75 billion weight loss industry.
Prescription weight loss drugs in a new study coming out from Goldman Sachs saying that they think the total addressable market globally by 2030 could be $100 billion.
From knowing people that are on those drugs, it's they're blockbuster for them, especially if they've tried diets over the years, and more of like a kickstart in a new lifestyle.
2023 was the year more drug companies got in on obesity drugs following the rise in popularity of GLP-1s for diabetes and weight loss. Here with how it all unfolded, we have Yahoo Finance's Anjali Kamlani. Anjali.
Thank you so much, guys. Obviously, weight loss drugs, GLP-1s in particular, were literally everywhere this year, from swimsuit season through Thanksgiving. There was literally always a news peg for it. I was never bored. They even had a moment at the Oscars.
When I look around this room, I can't help but wonder, is Ozempic right for me?
And just today, after months of not confirming, Oprah Winfrey acknowledged that she was indeed using a weight loss drug as a maintenance tool, but without naming which one. But first, let's address the important difference. There's type 2 diabetes drugs and weight loss drugs that make up the class of GLP-1 drugs, and that has caused the stir. The diabetes drugs are Novo Nordisk's Ozempic and Eli Lilly's Mounjaro, which are both available off-label for weight loss. GLP-1s have been around since 2005 with Eli Lilly's Byetta, but the newer drugs have set a new bar for weight loss. Novo's drug provides up to 15% weight loss with semaglutide, and then Lilly's drugs in higher doses of tirzepatide can help a person lose more than 20%. So that is really what has started the buzz around the potential drugs. In addition, they could potentially help with heart disease risk and other health issues like liver disease, kidney disease as well. And this has really been what has opened the door to greater insurance coverage potential, which is currently the biggest barrier as insurers worry about the sudden spike in costs for a drug that has a potential market of 50% of the US population. The reality is that the drugs are only used by about 1% of the market right now, projected to be a $100 billion industry by 2030, as you just heard. And then there's the worry that these drugs will also impact food, beverage, and basically everything else from airlines to clothing due to the loss of appetite, addictive snacking and drinking as well. as smaller waist sizes. So the catalyst to the change was Novo Nordisk, which is why we named them Company of the Year. It's the first time a drug like this has had the potential to impact such a large market. And it is the first time the Danish drug maker, which has really only been known for insulin for the longest time, has something else to brag about.
It's a big change. I've been with the company for more than 30 years. I'm only the 5th CEO in a 100-year-old company. And now we're growing, around 30%, 100 years into our lifetime. And suddenly we have brands that are becoming household names. And we've never ever had products that were widely known.
And Lars Jørgensen also told me that he's not sure the drug will have such drastic impacts on other sectors, but they could move the needle just a little.
My view is that some of those reactions are perhaps a bit exaggerated, but there's no doubt that with the intervention we see now with the GLP-1 based medicines, you see significant shift in consumer behavior, and some of these categories will be impacted.
So all told, the story is just beginning.
Okay, so if it is just beginning, then what should we be looking ahead to in 2024 in this story?
You definitely have more competitors in line. Eli Lilly nipping at Novo's heels with Zepbound just being approved. We've got Pfizer with its oral option, Lilly also working on an oral option, Roche and Amgen and others getting in or back into the race after having abandoned GLP-1s in the past. So that's really where the things are. But everyone keeps saying that Lilly and Novo are really the market contenders for the year. And you're talking about these two companies already making billions of dollars this year alone. I think Novo made somewhere in the ballpark of $12 billion off of these drugs, upgrading guidance 3 times. So you're looking at a really hot market right now. You have these strong drugs to contend with, and what could potentially be more than that? That's the question that remains. If you already have such improved weight loss, what's next? What else can you do to differentiate yourself in this market?
Now, Angela, you mentioned some barriers, right? Insurance coverage is one of them. Needles or another, right? People don't like needles. You mentioned some oral options kind of in the pipeline, Pfizer and others. Do we have any kind of timetable on when those might hit?
Pfizer is saying that their oral option could come out next year. So that's what we're waiting on. We know that it's in late stage trial, waiting for a readout early next year, and that's something that analysts are really waiting on. They did have a bit of a setback in their testing, looking at a once-a-day option to move forward rather than their twice-a-day because there were some issues. So that's really what's on the line for them. And the price, of course, is going to be a differentiator. Right now, if you've seen on your screen before, the monthly price of these drugs is near $1,000 or over $1,000. There it is, $1,300 for Wegovy per month, and then Zepbound came in at a bit of a discount to try and compete and convince employers in particular to cover these drugs. So that is one of the things that we're going to have to see is, do all of these factors, do the other diseases that it can help, do the reduced prices help insurance say, okay, maybe we do need to cover this?
Well, and we're talking in some cases about a lifetime commitment to these drugs. Thank you so much, Anjali Kamlani. Appreciate it.
Coming in at number 4 is union strikes.
We're not asking to be millionaires. We're not asking to join the billionaire class. We're asking for our fair share of the fruits of our labor.
Well, the prolonged actors and writers strike continues to shake up the box office.
It was affecting restaurants and catering companies. It was affecting trucking companies. It was affecting welders. It was affecting construction people. It was affecting dry cleaners.
Members of the United Auto Workers overwhelmingly voted to authorize possible strikes against the nation's 3 major auto manufacturers.
You're looking at the UAW president right now, essentially wearing black and white camo. This sounds like a UAW president that is in his own type of wartime mode.
From the writers and actors in Hollywood to the factory workers in Detroit, union members across the country taking to the picket lines to advocate for higher pay and better benefits. Here to break it all down, the impact and the outcomes of these strikes are our very own Alexandra Canal and Pras Subramanian, the 2 perfect people to talk about the union strikes and what we have seen play out over the last 12 months. But Ali, let me start with you. When it comes to the Hollywood strikes that started with the Writers Guild of America back in May, obviously lasted for longer than maybe some had initially anticipated. What was the outcome and what did we see?
Well, this was a historic strike considering we saw the actors join writers on the picket lines in July. And although these are two different guilds with two different ones, the thread line was similar in terms of what they were fighting for. Better protection surrounding the role of artificial intelligence, better pay, streaming residuals as more TV shows and movies go from cable to those streaming platforms. And these strikes, they come after the contracts have expired, and every 3 years you get a new contract. What was 3 years ago? It was 2020. It was the pandemic. Hollywood was just trying to keep the lights on. So there was this expectation that the guilds were going to really come into 2023 ready to fight with these studios. In terms of what they were able to get, the writers' strike lasted 118 days. They were able to secure increased regulations surrounding AI, minimum staffing requirements. This was a big one. They wanted a certain number of writers in the room, especially as streaming has allowed for more content. And they also saw viewership-based streaming bonuses and more data transparency, which I think is something that we're going to see across the industry. And then for the actors, their contract was valued at over $1 billion, also included above pattern minimum wage increases for AI. Members will receive, quote, informed consent and fair compensation for the creation and use of digital replicas of members. And then for the first time, there will be a roughly $40 million per year streaming residual bonus. So these were pretty sizable wins here when you think about these guilds and what they were ultimately fighting for here.
And Pros, I mean, we also tracked this UAW strike. Sean Fain essentially became a household name. I expected him to be a TikTok influencer after a while.
There were rap videos.
There were rap videos kicking off these press conferences. It wasn't even a press conferences. It was really just a briefing of what was going on. Did we encapsulate it well enough?
So Brad, the thing was, 6 months ago, no one knew who he was. He was the X factor, in my opinion. People were saying, this guy came out of nowhere. He was a longtime member, but he was never in leadership, really. He won by a razor slim margin. And all of a sudden, I heard rumblings in the summer, car companies or execs were kind of worried. They didn't know what to expect, and they had every right to be afraid because what we saw was these unprecedented strategy of stand-up strikes starting in mid-September, right? Caught everyone off guard. Instead of just striking one auto plant or one automaker and then making a pattern agreement and going to other guys, they struck all three. Mm-hmm. So there was a little bit of shock there. I think one of the biggest things, the timeline here is when Biden walked the line about 2 weeks into the strike. That was a huge turning point. A few weeks later, we had Ford kind of put out an actual real offer that the union entertained. Yeah. Shortly thereafter, you had a preliminary agreement, and then you had all the big three getting their workers to agree to the deal. But there was a hiccup with GM, of course, because of the fact that there was older workers that weren't necessarily happy with that deal. But at the end of the day, it all went through, and now we have a deal, and workers are back.
Pros, what do you think, though, this tells us about some of this momentum carrying over, right? Because this could almost just be the start when we take a look at the auto sector here. But the fact that they were so successful, the impact that it's going to have on these companies and what it means for maybe some of those other automakers that have yet to be or have not yet been the target of the unions.
I mean, within a few weeks of that deal being ratified by the membership, you had Toyota, Honda, I believe Hyundai, all giving raises to their U.S. workers who are all non-union. I spoke to labor strategists about that, and that's called the union substitution effect, where they're like, hey, we'll pay you enough to just not unionize, just take it. But they wouldn't have necessarily gotten those hikes if not for what happened this summer with the UAW.
So what economic impact did these strikes have on their industries as well as the broader economy here?
Well, we found out from the October jobs report that all in all this year, the UAW strikes, the Hollywood strikes, led to a loss of 75,000 jobs. Now, we saw that tick up again in the November jobs report. And then if you think about specifically to Hollywood, the cost to the LA economy, that estimate has been around $5 billion, primarily due to lost wages. And then you also had studios reshuffling their release schedules for the box office. The Dune sequel, that was a big movie that was supposed to debut in November, pushed into 2024. Luckily, with Barbenheimer and some of the other momentum with the Taylor Swift movie we got this summer, I think that helped lift those box office dollars a little bit. But it certainly wasn't an easy thing. Hollywood was completely shut down. You heard from all these studio executives how it was going to hit their bottom line the longer it continued. On a positive, you saw free cash flow go up. So I think coming next year, you're going to see those comps be pretty tough because because no one was spending money on creating new shows. Now I think you're going to slowly see production ramp back up again.
Absolutely. Alexandra, now, Pro-Supermanian, thanks so much for tracking all of these strikes as you've written about them at length over the course of the year and then helping encapsulate it here on the desk. We appreciate it.
Coming in at number 3, the collapse of the regional banks.
Silicon Valley Bank's collapse is the second largest bank failure in the U.S.
The FDIC took control of Silicon Valley Bank's assets.
It is and should be a matter of concern.
The regional banks. This is over the last 2 days. Some of these moves absolutely astonishing.
Investors will take the fall on this. Officers of the bank will be fired.
JP Morgan Chase stepping in to buy First Republic's assets after the failed regional lender was seized by regulators.
We're reminded about how fragile our banking system could be, and as a result, your banks only got even more powerful.
It was the financial story that shook the markets and the economy, triggering warnings of recession. We've got team coverage of what happened and the impact it's had. Joining us now, Yahoo Finance's David Hollerith and Jennifer Schonberger. David, let's start with you. Just outline for us, remind us what happened.
Yeah, it's tough to say exactly when all this ended and began. But on Thursday, March 9th, Silicon Valley Bank customers attempted to pull $42 billion in what was certainly the fastest bank run in U.S. history. This came after SVB announced it had taken a hit selling some of its bonds, some of its underwater bonds. It was also planning an emergency stock sale in a last-ditch effort to raise more cash. Most of SVB's customers were also startups with deposits at the bank over the insurance limit. So regulators seized SVB that Friday. They seized Signature Bank 2 days later, invoking the so-called systemic risk exception for both lenders, which guaranteed uninsured depositors would be made whole, but was not without its controversy. Though these two banks appeared to be outliers, other regional banks, specifically those with similar business models, faced mounting pressure once investors and depositors began to panic. So after 7 weeks from those two collapses, First Republic failed and was picked up by JP Morgan Chase from the FDIC. The rest of the year was by no means easygoing. Two other tiny rural banks failed. Under higher rates, bank lending also slowed and deposit costs continued rising. But yesterday, we saw, a round trip in which major indexes tracking the regional bank sector officially came back to levels before SVB collapsed. In general, 2023 was still the largest year ever for bank seizures as measured by assets. In total, 5 banks failed and 2 were the second and third largest failures in U.S. history. And it's a slightly different story for what went wrong at each of these banks. But if we just focus on Silicon Valley Bank, the first and second largest failure, the first to happen, the second largest, it came down to mismanagement of risks, both on the interest rate side and on the depositor concentration side. All these banks had high levels of uninsured deposits. They also had some problems that are sort of symptomatic of just what a regional bank has to do because they can't compete with the largest banks. That being said, a lot of this has gone back to what management had done and what they hadn't done during the times of the crisis and before that.
David, thank you for that and for that context, which is now leading to new banking regulation and frustration, we should mention, from the bigger banks. Jennifer, what does the ripple effect now look like?
That it does, Josh. A string of regional bank failures this spring prompted regulators to propose banks beef up their capital buffers to prevent against future failures. The proposal seeks to raise capital requirements by 16%, holding both giant banks and mid-sized institutions to new standards. But banks, as you mentioned, vehemently opposed to this, launching an all-out campaign, including NFL ads. The banks argue that the new rules are just too onerous. Specifically, banks warn that the new capital requirements could make mortgages and loans to small businesses more expensive, while also pushing up consumer prices and the cost of saving for retirement.
If you have the same capital requirements increased by 20% to do the exact same activities you did yesterday, you have to get a higher return, and that higher return will be borne by the customer base.
Even some members of Congress have expressed skepticism, including Democratic Senator Mark Warner, who says the banks may be right and that regulators have told him there are a lot of changes in store to that proposal. Take a listen.
I think they've got an argument. I think that you've got the circumstance where interest rates are at a recent high. The idea of additional capital requirements and additional buffer beyond what's already in place will mean there'll be less capital available for lending.
Regulators have extended a comment period until January, at which point they will accept more feedback, take that into consideration, and put forth a final proposed rule, likely in the spring. One source within one of the big banks tells me that if the proposal is not up to snuff for them, there's a very high chance they could take this to court.
And coming in at number 2 is the Fed.
Over the past year, we've taken forceful actions to tighten the stance of monetary policy.
Do you know how many people who are currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
I don't have that number in front of me.
It's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people.
The Fed never promises anything.
The Fed probably has overdone it.
The Fed is feeling really good about the fact that inflation is coming down.
We are leaving 2023 in a much better place than most commentators and probably even the Fed thought we would.
The Federal Reserve had a lot of battles to fight this year, from stubborn inflation to questioning economists and angry legislators. Here to break down the ups and downs for the FOMC and its chair, Jerome Powell, is Yahoo Finance's Fed reporter Jennifer Schonberger. Hey, Jen.
Hey, Brad, what a difference a year makes for the Fed. The central bank began 2023 slowing the pace of its most aggressive rate hiking campaign to cool inflation since the 1980s. Now, as 2023 comes to an end, that campaign appears to be all but over. The Fed last raised rates in July to a 22-year high. But after holding rates steady for their third consecutive meeting this month, Fed officials predicted they would likely cut rates 3 times in 2024. The reason? Inflation is falling closer and closer to the Fed's target of 2%. Even Fed Chair Jay Powell, after months of sounding hawkish, turned slightly dovish at his last press conference of the year. Take a listen.
You see that people are not writing down rate hikes. That's us thinking that we have done enough, but not feeling that really strongly, confidently, and not wanting to take the possibility of a rate hike off the table. Nonetheless, it's not the base case anymore.
This pivot was months in the making. Fed officials warned for much of the second half of the year that they would need to see further progress that inflation was coming down before they could stop raising rates. Powell himself offered several warnings.
At last year's Jackson Hole Symposium, I delivered a brief, direct message. My remarks this year will be a bit longer, but the message is the same. It is the Fed's job to bring inflation down to our 2% goal, and we will do so.
Another warning came in September.
Given how far we have come, we are in a position to proceed carefully as we assess the incoming data and the evolving outlook and risks.
And yet a third came on the 1st of this month.
It would be premature to conclude with confidence that we have achieved a sufficiently restrictive stance or to speculate on when policy might ease.
The shift that happened this week took many by surprise. It comes after several data points show inflation continues to drop slowly. Powell said at his press conference this week that rate cuts will be a topic of discussion looking ahead.
And we are finally at the top spot. Coming in at number 1, can we do the drum roll again? It can only be AI, the tech boom.
OpenAI, the research and development team behind viral bots, could see a valuation of up to $29 billion.
I believe that there will be far greater jobs on the other side of this.
Well, the best thing you can do as a CEO to jumpstart your stock is talk about AI.
We're also deeply investing in AI responsibility.
AI is going to change everything.
Is government needed to play a role in regulating AI?
The consequences of AI going wrong are severe.
I mean, when Gwyneth Paltrow says it's going to be changing everything, then that's it. It's been a year. What a year it's been to break down how the biggest players in tech have jostled to be in first place in the AI race. Here's Yahoo Finance's Dan Howley.
To say that 2023 was the year of AI would be the understatement of, well, the year. From NVIDIA and Google to Microsoft and OpenAI, Silicon Valley couldn't get enough. In just Q2, the term AI was mentioned nearly 4 times per earnings call. That's a lot of AI and a lot of investment. Heck, even Wendy's got in on the action, adding a generative AI assistant to its drive-thru. Here are some of the biggest highlights from the biggest theme of 2023, the generative AI explosion. It might have been the most important story of 2023, but it started in November 2022 with the release of ChatGPT by OpenAI. The chatbot quickly became the fastest growing app in history to that point, reaching 100 million monthly users in just 2 months.
OpenAI is the most advanced and the most widely used AI platform in the world now.
On the heels of the bot's success, Microsoft announced it was investing $10 billion in OpenAI. In February, Google debuted its rival chatbot, Bard, but the unveil was light on details. Days later, Microsoft took the wraps off of its OpenAI-powered Bing bot. But Google kept pouring on the news in May, debuting its Search Generative Experience. Microsoft then fired back, revealing it was bringing its AI-powered Windows Copilot to Windows 11. Oh, and in May, NVIDIA's market capitalization briefly topped $1 trillion for the first time, cementing its status as the AI chip leader. In September, Amazon, keen on getting deeper into the action, announced it was investing $4 billion in OpenAI competitor Anthropic. Meta, meanwhile, revealed an AI assistant for its social platforms, as well as AI personalities for celebrities like Tom Brady and Kendall Jenner.
Seriously? How could you not know that?
In November, all hell broke loose at OpenAI when the board fired Sam Altman seemingly out of nowhere. It caused investor uproar. CEOs came and went. Microsoft offered him a job. Hundreds of OpenAI employees threatened to resign. And finally, OpenAI brought him back. But this time with new board members, including a non-voting observer role for Microsoft. A big year for big tech, and no doubt one that will change how we all invest, work, and play forever. And it feels like it's all just getting started.